Shalom, welcome back. We're going to pick up in Malachi, looking at the greater Exodus. I skipped Haggai and Zechariah. There wasn't anything in Haggai that had anything to do with the greater Exodus. Pretty much everything Haggai said was related to the time of the Second Temple. With Zechariah, a lot of it had to do with the rebuilding of the temple and also the ministry of Yeshua and the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 A.D. There were a couple of things that he said that I think we could have applied to the greater Exodus, but I didn't see the point in making a video that really just dealt with just a couple of verses as opposed to an entire book. So I'm skipping forward to Malachi. Malachi's name means my messenger. He wrote the book of Malachi probably between 440 and 400 BC. Very little is known about Malachi except what can be inferred from his public messages recorded in the book. The book that Malachi wrote is distinguished as being the only prophetic book that ends not in deliverance but judgment. In fact, it ends with the word curse. And after this, of course, the next book in the Bible would be the book of Matthew, which is the beginning of the story of Yeshua. And Malachi writes about preparing the way for him, about this prophet Elijah that was going to come. And so it's almost like he's introducing the book of Matthew in a way. So in the book of Matthew, there's not anything in it that really directly ties with the greater Exodus. The reason that I'm not skipping it like I did the others, though, is because he does deal with Esau. And immediately before the greater Exodus, you have Esau. He's essentially brings upon Jacob this time of Jacob's trouble. And because Esau is talked about in the book of Malachi, I think maybe we can use it for a little bit of instruction as to what is going on with Esau. Also, one of the things I mentioned previously in some of my videos is I've noticed that there's this almost like a competition between the priests and the prophets all through Scripture. There's this struggle where and personally, I come down on the side of the prophets. I think the prophets were introducing the true faith, the way that Yahweh wanted to be worshipped, the way Yahweh wanted to be served, and the priests were the ones corrupting things. That they were, and you can see that even to this day, that the priest class tends to be made up of two kinds of people. There's these really good, honest, sincere people who want to serve Yahweh. And then there's this other group within there who are interested in consolidating power to themselves, to using their position as a priest or a pastor as an opportunity to exercise authority over other people or to even enrich themselves. And it's a struggle that's been going on for a millennium. I've been watching a series of videos on YouTube about their historical videos. The name of it is Our Subverted History. It's made by a YouTube creator named Asher Logos. And I recommend that if you're interested in history at all, to watch those videos. I think there's 10 of them total, and I've watched most of them at this point. But he even mentions that same struggle between, for him it's not between prophets and priests, but it's between the sincere believers, and there's always this priest class that seems to be constantly trying to get in a position of authority over them. And in some of the videos, he's speaking about the early Europeans, the Goths, the Saxons, and their beliefs were actually, and I'm probably going to end up doing another video just on this subject, but a lot of their beliefs in the Creator God were very similar to what we see in the Clementine writings that Peter speaks about how God is, he has no negative qualities. He's not vengeful or wrathful. That he brings justice. So what we think of as his wrath is actually just him bringing justice to the earth. And when I was listening to these videos and he's reading from historical accounts, and I'm like, man, this sounds like straight out of the Clementine writings, the way that Peter describes his view of God. And so I think that this is a struggle, a historic struggle for all of the earth, of this priestly class that tries to come in and rule by fear and by rules and regulations and put themselves in these positions of authority over men, versus the common person who hears God's voice, who knows what God desires, who can read the scriptures and read the true message that God is trying to get through to people. And that these two are like competing factions. And when you fall into apostasy, this priestly class tends to raise up and get power over you. And you can see that in medieval Europe when you look at the power and the control that the Catholic Church had, and the way they were profiting off of charging people indulgences and so forth. And the synagogue of Satan, of course, is right in there with that, putting themselves in this position of having some kind of special relationship to God that they don't have. And that's why you see a lot of the synagogue of Satan's flags flying outside of churches. Is because of this. Because the churches have fallen into such apostasy, and the nation has fallen into such apostasy, that now this ancient priestly class is now exercising authority over the laity. And the priestly class is also kind of like a mercantile class. It's just a weird relationship there that I've been picking up on for quite a while. So we're gonna go through the whole book of Malachi. I like this prophetic book. I think it's interesting, and he says some things in here that you probably heard misused in church quite a bit, and we'll get to that in a moment. But Malachi 1:1, the oracle of the word of Yahweh to Israel through Malachi. I have loved you, says Yahweh, but you say, how have you loved us? Was not Esau Jacob's brother, declares Yahweh? Yet I have loved Jacob, but I have hated Esau, and I have made his mountains a desolation, and appointed his inheritance for the jackals of the wilderness. Though Edom says, we have been beaten down, but we will return and build up the ruins. Thus says Yahweh of hosts, they may build, but I will tear down. And men will call them the wicked territory, and the people toward whom Yahweh is indignant forever. Your eyes will see this, and you will say, Yahweh be magnified beyond the border of Israel. So I don't think it's an accident that this is the opening to the book. I think that this paragraph here is something that you should keep in mind when reading this book. And the reason I'm saying that is because the priestly class that I was speaking about in the previous slide is made up of Esau. Looking at the historical record and looking at some of the things that we talked about in Who is Esau, Edom, that series of videos I did, in Josephus' writings, he speaks about how John Hyrcanus, the Hashmonean king, he came in and overthrew Edom and forcibly converted the Edomites to the religion of Judea. And he forced them to get circumcised, and if they didn't get circumcised, they were exiled. And from that point on, the Edomites kind of gradually worked their way up into positions of power, and their power was totally solidified whenever Antipater, the father of Herod the Great, was made king of Judea. And of course, that power, that authority was passed on to his son Herod. And Herod killed all the Aaronic high priests. He killed a lot of the Levitical priests. He began to appoint his own people into positions of power in the temple and the sanctuary. And later on, we'll see how Yahweh speaks about this covenant with Levi being supplanted, and I think he's referring to this. I think that this is now this book was obviously written before all that happened, but I think that was what he was speaking about when he's talking about how the covenant with Levi was being violated. And so, to this day, this whole like Babylonian system of religion has been perpetrated by Esau. And there's a direct connection with Esau and the modern day Jews of today. So when I speak about Esau, that's primarily who I'm talking about. And Esau, these Edomite Jews, have even infiltrated the church. And so a lot of these, specifically talking about the Catholic Church, but they've done it with the Protestant churches also. So when you see a lot of these churches where they're promoting homosexuality, where they're quote embracing end quote this homosexual agenda, if you look at the pastors of these churches, they look a whole lot like the tribe of Edom. And I don't think that's an accident. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that's literally what's happening, is that these Marxist Jews have made their way into the priesthood of different churches, possibly even into the papacy, and that's how this agenda is being pushed. So this, to me, it's all connected. A son honors his father, and a servant his master. Then if I am a father, where's my honor? And if I'm a master, where's my respect? Says Yahweh of hosts to you, O priests, who despise my name. Again, can't say it enough. I think he's specifically speaking about the Edomite priests. But you say, how have we despised your name? And Yahweh responds, you're presenting defiled food upon my altar. But you will say, how have we defiled you? In that you say the table of Yahweh is to be despised. But when you present the blind for sacrifice, is it not evil? And when you present the lame and the sick, is that not evil? Why not offer it to your governor? Would he be pleased with you? Or would he receive you kindly, says Yahweh of hosts? But now will you not entreat Yahweh's favor, that he may be gracious to us? With such an offering on your part, will he receive any of you kindly, says Yahweh of hosts? Oh, that there was one among you who would shut the gates, that you may not uselessly kindle fire on my altar. I am not pleased with you, says Yahweh of hosts, nor will I accept an offering from you. So he's speaking about these offerings, and as I've said numerous times in various videos, the prophets repeatedly say that he does not want animal sacrifices. But now they've even went past sacrificing these animals, where now they're sacrificing, they're bringing the lame, the diseased animals, the blind animals, and such as that. And it's not even that he's saying that he wants the animals. He's just pointing out the fact that they're bringing the worst of the worst as their supposed sacrifices. But he says what he really wants here at the bottom, in the yellow, he just wants somebody to stop it. Will somebody please shut the gates so that you stop this needless animal sacrifice system? And we see that. We see that happen in the days of Yeshua, when he comes in and he cleanses the temple. He drives out those that are buying and selling the animals. And he won't allow anyone to bring a sacrifice in to the temple during those days. The church focuses on the money changers, but the money changers were secondary to that whole thing. The primary target of Yeshua's wrath at that point was getting the people buying and selling the animals out of the temple. From the rising of the sun even to its setting, my name will be great among the nations, and in every place incense is going to be offered to my name, and a grain offering that is pure for my name will be great among the nations, says Yahweh of hosts. So notice there in verse 11, he doesn't mention anything about blood sacrifices. He says grain offerings and incense. But you are profaning it in that you say the table of Yahweh is defiled, and as for its food is to be despised. You also say, my, how tiresome it is, and you disdainfully sniff at it, says Yahweh of hosts. You know, when you read that in the yellow, I know this in the context of this is speaking about sacrifices, but is that not what the church says about his law? How tiresome his law is, and they disdainfully sniff at it. Just something to consider. And you bring what was taken by what robbery, and what is lame or sick, so that you bring the offering. Should I receive this from your hand, says Yahweh? But cursed be the swindler who has a male in his flock and vows it, but sacrifices the blemished animal to Yahweh. For I am a great king, says Yahweh of hosts, and my name is feared among the nations. And now this commandment is for you, O priest. If you do not listen, and if you do not take it to heart to give honor to my name, says Yahweh of hosts, then I will send the curse upon you, and will curse your blessings, and indeed I have cursed them already, because you are not taking it to heart. Behold, I am going to rebuke your offspring, and I will spread refuse on your faces, the refuse of your feasts, and you will be taken away with it. So some Bible translations say, I will spread dung before your face. But he's not saying, and I've said this before, he's not saying I'm going to spread it before your face. If you go into the Hebrew, it reads the way this verse says. He says he's going to smear dung on their faces. And what this really comes down to is, again, I know that he's talking a lot about the sacrifices, but it's really about his covenant. It's about his law, the agreement that he made with the people and the commandments that he gave them. And I think it's fitting and understandable why he says that he's going to do that to the priests there. Then you will know that I have sent this covenant to you, that my covenant may continue with Levi, says Yahweh of hosts. My covenant with him was one of life and peace, and I gave them to him as an object of reference. So he revered me and stood in awe of my name. True instruction was in his mouth, and unrighteousness was not found in his lips. He walked with me in peace and uprightness, and he turned many back from iniquity. So again, this right here, he's speaking about the law. He's not speaking about sacrifices. For the lips of a priest should preserve knowledge, and men should seek instruction from his mouth, for he is the messenger of Yahweh of hosts. You know how often I've tried to have conversations with people who have put themselves in a position of authority over God's flock. How many times I've tried to have conversations with people about this stuff, and they just, they don't want to receive it. Some people do. It's not 100%. I have talked to some pastors who were willing to listen and who wanted to understand and asked genuine questions, but for the most part, it is they get very adversarial toward me. There was one that I told you guys a story a while back of this pastor. It was I was invited to join a group on Facebook, so I was making some comments on a post on Facebook about this drag queen event that was coming into our town, and I went there to protest it, and I was speaking online to some people about it. And anyway, long story short, somebody who read some of the things I said asked me to join this group, and the name of the group was something like Christians who actually fear God or something. I don't remember the name of the group, but I was actually invited to join, and there was a pastor in that group, and when he found out that I had a YouTube channel, he went to my YouTube channel and went through all the names of the videos looking for ammunition he could use against me, and confronted me about it. And I I stood my ground on what all was said, and I was like, look, if you want to debate anything I teach, give me a specific question, like give me a specific thing to talk about, because all he was doing is he was mentioning the titles of the videos, and I was like, did you watch any of the videos? Is there something in the video you think is false? Because I will respond to that if there is. And so instead of engaging in the conversation, he went to the administrator of the group and had them remove me. And like that's the type of cowardice that I have faced quite often with pastors. There was a pastor who came over to our house one day, and he basically said, "Hey, I heard that you." Well, I'm not going to go into the whole story, but the subject came up about me knowing that Paul was false, and he was like, "Well, I don't know anything that Paul says is contrary to what Jesus said." So I started naming off things he said. I started giving examples. And the pastor just turned and he started like walking as fast as he could toward his car. And I was walking behind him. I was just like, and so then he said this and he said that. And I was just giving him these examples. And the guy jumped in his car and took off. Like he was a vampire and I was holding a crucifix up at him or something. And the lips of a priest should preserve knowledge. But for what I've seen, for the most part, and again, there are some exceptions, but for the most part, most of them flee from instruction. Most of them flee from information or from knowledge. If you have more knowledge than them, then they accuse you of being puffed up, just like their daddy Paul. They love using that word for anyone who has more knowledge than they do, but yet they tell you that you should study the Bible and read Scripture, but they just don't want you to do it too much. For the lips of a priest should preserve knowledge, and men should seek instruction from his mouth, for he is a messenger of Yahweh of hosts. But as for you, you have turned aside from the way. You have caused many to stumble by the instruction. You have corrupted the covenant of Levi, says Yahweh of hosts. There's nothing more committed to keeping you from learning the truth than a priest who doesn't want his position challenged. Verse 9. So I also have made you despised and abased before all the people, just as you are not keeping my ways, but are showing partiality in the instruction. Do we not all have one Father? Has not one God created us? Why do we deal treacherously, each against his brother, so as to profane the covenant of our fathers? Judah has dealt treacherously, and an abomination has been committed in Israel and in Jerusalem. For Judah has profaned the sanctuary of Yahweh, which he loves, and has married the daughter of a foreign god. As for the man who does this, may Yahweh cut off from the tents of Jacob everyone who awakes and answers, or who presents an offering to Yahweh of hosts. This is another thing you do. You cover the altar of Yahweh with tears, with weeping, and with groaning, because he no longer regards the offering or accepts it in favor from your hand. Yet you say, for what reason? Because Yahweh has been a witness between you and the wife of your youth, against whom you have dealt treacherously, though she is your companion and your wife by covenant. But not one has done so who has a remnant of the Spirit. And what did that one do while he was seeking a godly offspring? Take heed then to your spirit, and let no one deal treacherously against the wife of your youth. For I hate divorce, says Yahweh, the God of Israel. And him who covers his garment with wrong says to Yahweh of hosts, so take heed to your spirit that you do not deal treacherously. You have wearied Yahweh with your words, yet you say, how have we wearied him? In that you say, everyone who does evil is good in the sight of Yahweh, and he delights in them. Or, where is the God of justice? Now, this in the yellow, this is the situation of the modern churches in America when it comes to the question of the Edomite Jews. You know, the church will say, oh, that's God's chosen people. well, they can't do anything wrong. And yet they're promoting homosexuality and transgenderism, and they're promoting the breakup of the family, feminism, abortion, anything that's wicked or evil in the sight of God. They're all about it. In fact, Proverbs 6:16, I don't know that you will find a more apropos description of the sins of Esau than this. There are 6 things which Yahweh hates. 7 are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that run rapidly to evil, a false witness who utters lies, and one who spreads strife among brothers. Those verses are an absolute indictment against Esau Edom. Because if you watch the way the descendants of Esau Edom operate, that is a perfect description of them. Which it makes sense then when you go to Malachi 1:3, when he says that he hates Esau. That's why. It's because Esau does everything that Yahweh hates. And the churches say everyone who does evil is good. Everyone doing wickedness is good. Because they're his chosen people. Behold, I'm going to send my messenger, and he will clear the way before me. And Yahweh, whom you seek, will suddenly come to his temple, and the messenger of the covenant in which you delight. Behold, he is coming. And I believe that to be a prophecy about Yeshua coming to the temple. Behold, he is coming, says Yahweh of hosts. But who can endure the day of his coming? And who can stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire and like a fuller's soap. He will sit as a smelter and purifier of silver, and he will purify the sons of Levi, and refine them like gold and silver, so that they may present to Yahweh offerings of righteousness. Then the offering of Judah and Jerusalem will be pleasing to Yahweh, as in the days of old, and as in former years. So all of this, in my opinion, is about Yeshua's coming. Then I will draw near to you for judgment, and I will be a swift witness against the sorcerers, and against the adulterers, and against those who swear falsely, and against those who oppress the wage earner and his wages, the widow and the orphan, and those who turn aside the alien, and do not fear me, says Yahweh of hosts. For I, Yahweh, do not change, therefore you, O sons of Jacob, are not consumed. From the days of your fathers you have turned aside from my statutes and have not kept them. Return to me, and I will return to you, says Yahweh of hosts. But you say, how shall we return? So about the top part of your screen there, verses verse 5 and, verse 5. Take verse 5 and you go to Matthew 23 and read the 8 woes that Yeshua gives toward the Pharisees, and compare what it says here in verse 5 to what it says in those woes. And he says, woe to you who search land and sea for a proselyte, and then when you find a proselyte, you make him twice the son of hell as yourself. Well, that's turning aside the alien. It speaks about stealing the homes of widows and orphans, and here it says those who oppress widows. It's just like there's a definitely parallel between Malachi 3:5 and the 8 woes that Yeshua says in Matthew 23. So if you want some homework, go and do that. You'll be surprised. From the days of your father you have turned aside from my statutes and not kept them. Okay, well that again, that's the church, right? They scoff at God's commandments. They want God to return, but they don't want to return to him. It's like they love to quote 2 Chronicles 7:14, but they leave out the part where it says turn from your wicked ways. And specifically it's like I've heard Mike Pence repeat that 2 Chronicles 7:14 probably 6 or 7 times. And every single time he consistently leaves out the part about turning from your wicked ways. He says, humble yourselves and turn and seek my face. But he leaves out what you're turning from. He just says turn. It's turn from your wicked ways. And so the fact that he does it every single time tells me he's doing it on purpose. I think it may be like a Masonic thing or something. I don't know. But I've heard pastors do it too. I've heard pastors quote that verse verbatim, but they leave out turning from your wicked ways. Malachi 3:8. Will a man rob God? Oh, here's this. Talk about robbing God. This is every pastor's favorite verse. So if you've ever been to a Christian church, you've probably heard this every Sunday. The only part of the New Testament that is still in full force and effect, according to the false preachers. They tell you the law is done away with, but they want to quote you Malachi 3:8, which speaks about tithing. Will a man rob God? Yet you are robbing me. But you say, how have we robbed you? In tithes and offerings. You are cursed with a curse, for you are robbing me, the whole nation of you. Bring in the whole tithe into the storehouse, so that there may be food in my house, and test me now in this, says Yahweh of hosts. If I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you a blessing until it overflows, then I will rebuke the devourer for you, so that it will not destroy the fruits of the ground, nor will your vine in the field cast its grapes, says Yahweh of hosts. All the nations will call you blessed, and you will be a delighted land, says Yahweh of hosts. Okay, so the reason I underlined so that there may be food in my house, is because the tithe has always been about bringing food. A tithe of your increase is supposed to be from your garden, from your field. So if you collect 10 ears of corn, you should be bringing one of those ears of corn into the temple for your tithe. Your tithe is not, the commandment to tithe was not about bringing a tenth of your paycheck. If you don't have a garden, if you are not collecting produce from the land, you're not obligated to bring a tithe. Your check, whether it's 10% or 20% or 5%, the portion of your check that you bring in, if you get paid and you want to give part of it to the church, that is an offering. That is not a tithe. Yes, the word offering is mentioned there in verse 8, but they use this verse to pressure people to bring a tenth of their paycheck in to the church, and that is not, I don't see where that's ever commanded by Yahweh. I mean, that's like, I've read the Bible through and through many times. I can't see where it says when you go to church outside of Jerusalem, you need to bring in this offering. The tithe, the 10%, it doesn't even have to go, like if there's no temple, you don't have to bring it to the temple. You could give it to the needy person next door. So if you're going to give an offering to the church, it's a free will offering. They should call it a free will offering. They shouldn't call it a tithe. Your words have been arrogant against me, says Yahweh. Yet you say, what have we spoken against you? You have said, it is vain to serve God. And what profit is it that we have kept his charge, and that we have walked in mourning before Yahweh of hosts? So now we call the arrogant blessed. Not only are the doers of wickedness built up, but they also test God and escape. Then those who feared Yahweh spoke to one another, and Yahweh gave attention and heard it, and a book of remembrance was written before him for those who fear Yahweh and who esteem his name. They will be mine, says Yahweh of hosts, on the day that I prepare my own possession, and I will spare them as a man spares his own son who serves him. So you will again distinguish between the righteous and the wicked, between one who serves God and one who does not serve him. So if somebody doesn't serve God, don't call them God's chosen people. For behold, the day is coming, burning like a furnace, and all the arrogant and every evildoer shall be chaff, and the day is coming that will set them ablaze, says Yahweh of hosts, so that it will leave them neither root nor branch. But for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness will arise with healing in its wings, and you will go forth and skip about like calves from the stall. You will tread down the wicked, for they will be ashes under the soles of your feet in the day which I am preparing, says Yahweh of hosts. Remember the law of Moses my servant, even the statutes and the ordinances which I commanded him in Horeb, for all of Israel. Behold, I'm going to send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and terrible day of Yahweh. He will restore the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, so that I will not come and smite the land with a curse. All right, that's all for this time. Thanks for listening. Shalom.